And we're back.
Welcome back, everybody, to the only podcast that has one big, beautiful ass. I'm Dr. Patrick Armshaw.
He's the left ass, and I'm Dr. Christopher Silverstein, the right ass.
And together, with our asses combined, we are doctors.
But not doctors.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Another fun week of British and American politics.
You know, it really has been. It has been. And before we get started, Chris, I would like to take a moment to just say happy 4th of July to all Americans who are listening to this podcast, because this is the day to commemorate our independence from the perfectly reasonable constitutional democracy in which Chris and I both live, actually. And
well, I mean, that's what it's like now, Patrick.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, let's not pretend as if, in 1775, they had this specific system without lots of interference from the aristocracy.
That's an excellent point.
The House of Lords was way more powerful back then.
Oh, fantastically powerful. They could do things like veto legislation,
Yeah.
And they could do things like, determine who could be put in office.
Yeah,
And wait, hang on, Chris. They were the Senate.
They were the hereditary Senate.
Wait, so just to clarify, like the ridiculous and unconstitutional second house of parliament that eventually lost all its power because that was a necessary part of creating a constitutional democracy in the United Kingdom. That's America's current system.
I wouldn't say it's the exact same system. I wouldn't say that the Senate is at a point. You know what? You should have known this. It started off a lot similar to that because the governors of the state or the states themselves got to appoint senators.
Right, exactly. Direct election of senators only started in, I think, the 1910s.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. I think it's in one of the amendments that they're able to do that. So, I mean, we're talking about. It's not a 1-for-1, right?
It is not.
It is not a 1-for-1. I would say senators are now way more powerful than lords today.
Oh, absolutely. But on the downside, Chris, they get to wear a lot less ermine.
No robes, no thrones, no golden thrones, no lions and unicorns sitting around.
Have we thought about offering the Senate, we take away all your institutional power, but you get to wear the pretty dresses?
Yeah, I don't think those guys would go for that deal. They make a little bit too much money in the system to which they are accustomed. We could talk about that another day. How senators and representatives have access to inside information, and their portfolios tend to rise and fall with the markets just before the markets rise and fall.
Well, gosh, that's quite funny, Chris, because recently there was just a story about several Republican politicians selling their stock in healthcare companies.
Yeah. Right
before voting for the one big, beautiful bill.
Wow. And that leads us to the topics for this first half of the podcast, doesn't it?
Amazing. It's almost like we planned it out in advance. Hot tip, we did not plan that out.
No, we steered right into that. We created our own path, carved it right through the forest of bullshit, and here we are.
Exactly.
But so 2 bills passed in 2 countries, and the United Kingdom and the United States both had a very big week for legislation for 2 very, very different reasons.
Quite.
So how about we start with the welfare bill here in the UK?
I think that's an excellent idea.
Yeah, and then we'll go to the the big, beautiful bomb of a bill. So, here in the UK, the Labour government, which we talked about last week, has been doing their best to take a dump all over the field with their first year in power, which...
I gotta say, for a first year in power, they've done an excellent job of fucking everything up.
They've done an excellent job of promoting reform.
Yeah, it really is fantastic. I mean, now, to be fair, they have done some things. They've apparently, passed some bills to, strengthen some workers' rights to some degree, theoretically. And there have been some, progressive elements. But what's amazing is anything that they have done that might have played well to their base, or indeed to the majority of voters in Britain, has been completely overshadowed by this current welfare reform bill that they just passed.
Yeah, no, and like we talked about last week, there was a series of bills that were effectively designed to reduce government spending because the UK spends a lot of money servicing its own debt, and they have these things called fiscal rules, and the fiscal rules are self-imposed barriers to spending so that you don't start spending without the ability to pay back money. Because as we talked about again on this program, when a country issues debt to anyone, you, me, companies, whoever, they have to pay back that money plus a little bit more.
Well, exactly, right? Because who's going to lend money unless they're going to make some money off of lending the money, right?
That's right.
Yeah, because otherwise, if I lend my money to someone and I don't get interest, I don't have my money anymore.
Well, that's just a gift.
Right? Exactly. Even if I want it back at some point, still, it's nice to have money hanging around, because otherwise, how can I live out my Scrooge McDuck fantasies?
So I was just talking about that earlier today. I was just thinking about the size of the coins you need. You can't use big 1 ounce gold coins because you die.
Oh, exactly.
But if you had thin metal coins, I think it could dive into a pool of thin metal coins, not well-made coins, right?
Yeah.
I'm not saying you can swim around in it. I'm saying that you could get into it a little bit deeper.
Well, exactly. To be fair, Scrooge McDuck did have a very large Vaseline bill, so that's probably worth bringing up.
Well, how you knew that and I don't is that's the secret for you. So anyway, I digress. So the welfare bill in the UK was designed effectively to reform the welfare system, and it's called the Universal Credit and Personal Independence Payment Bill. And of course, there is a disclaimer here that I work for the S&P Westminster Group in Parliament, so I was there while this happened. So last week we talked about how when the bill was tabled, lots of Labour MPs and then eventually lots of other opposition MPs joined together to oppose the bill using a mechanism called a reasoned amendment. A reasoned amendment doesn't change the bill. A reasoned amendment basically says we're voting against the bill for these reasons, and if this passes, the bill dies, because obviously there's enough people to stop the passage of the bill at that point, and it doesn't go further anymore. And there were over 100 Labour members, and there, the change of 20 or 30 more would have been more than enough to kill the bill.
Right.
So that was last week. In the interim, the Labour Party whips and Labour Party operation went into full effect. I mean, when I left work, last week, the size of the rebellion was was over 100. By the time we got back on the day of the bill, the rebellion was about 40.
Right.
They peeled off about 60 of their own MPs using techniques that I don't know what they used. I don't know how they did it, because they made a lot of concessions, which we'll talk about. But the idea that you had over 100 members of your own party, a party of about 400, ready to vote against you, and you were able to peel off over half.
That's impressive.
In the span of 3 or 4 days, is interesting, and in just on the face of it impressive, but also concerning to see what were the trade-offs, right?
So presumably some of the trade-offs are going to be in terms of what's in the bill, because if you're a member of Parliament in the Labour Party and it's your party that is in government, then for you to decide to vote against such a major bill, that has to be caused by something. And you would think that would be caused by problems with what's in the bill. Disagreements with, I don't know, for example, kicking thousands of people off of, personal independence payments.
Well, see, that's just it. So the original bill had thousands, if not millions of people who would be affected. Because there's two types of things here. There's personal independence payments, there's universal credit.
Yep.
And universal credit came in during the last set of austerity changes between 2010 and 2015,
yep.
where the Conservative Party decided that they wanted to change the way the welfare system works.
Yep.
And they created kind of a bundle welfare plan called universal credit, which was also hugely unpopular because the design of universal credit wasn't to help people. It was designed to kick people off as quickly as possible to reduce the amount of money the government spends on the poor.
I would say that's a very partisan and very, sharp way of looking at it, Chris. I think it's also probably the right way of looking at it, to be fair.
It is.
For clarity's sake, as part of my volunteering, I volunteered with the Free Representation Unit, which is an organization that provides legal representation for people in first-tier tribunals, so people who are appealing decisions by the Department for Work and Pensions. Which means that actually I have represented quite a few clients on the issue of universal credit eligibility on personal independence payment, on employment support allowance. So I actually do have some background here, and I can state that my experience helping people with universal credit has been that it is a dog's breakfast, Chris.
Dog's breakfast. That's a term they use here. What would we call it in America? Shitburger?
Yeah. Yep. I was going to say a complete hash, but no, I think shitburger is actually a bit more scientific.
Yeah, and again, it's because the point of these bills is not to help people; it's to kick people off of welfare, because the assumption is, and it's almost always by rich people, that anyone who's in need of public help is just a lazy chancer, a lazy bastard who doesn't want to get out of bed. They don't want to get a job, because jobs are really easy to get, and also a job that pays you enough money where you can survive.
Yeah. Oh, easy as pie. Easy. So easy to get a job that pays all of your bills.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have any money, simply get a job.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, my cousin Tony, for example, he's an investment banker. He's a complete moron. So there you go.
Anyone can do it.
Anyone
can do it. Just apply.
Exactly.
Just put in your resume or your CV.
Spend a bit more time down at the Horse and Country Club. Yeah. Make those connections. Get it together, people. Do I have to hold your hand?
I know, seriously. I mean, it's so easy just to go up to your friends at the country club, tap Nigel on the shoulder, and say, "Nigel, old chap.
Yeah.
Mind giving me a job?" And he'll just say yes.
Well,
here's 250,000 pounds or dollars. Which ones you want?
Yeah.
Right now, you'd want pounds over dollars. But so the bill passed. So the bill was, as written, going to take millions of people off of personal independence payments. Which is, Patrick, explain that one.
Yeah. Okay. So for those of you following along at home, universal credit, as Chris pointed out, this is a bundle of several different previously separate benefits that you could get, such as employment support allowance, which is an allowance that you get basically if you cannot work because you're temporarily disabled, which itself was replaced a disability allowance. You also have things like support for rent and what have you. A lot of things are bundled up. Personal independence payment is a little bit separate, because personal independence payment, there the idea is that it's not payment because of your low level of income. And it's not payment because you are disabled and unable to work, because that would be employment support allowance, that part of universal credit. Instead, personal independence payment is basically there to provide extra funds for people who face significant disability challenges in either mobility or what's called daily living. So an example of how this might work. Let's say that you are someone who qualifies for the mobility part of personal independence payment. And that would be because you are unable to walk more than 50 meters without having to stop because of pain or shortness of breath. And you're unable to then walk another 50 meters without having to rest for some time, basically.
50 meters, by the way, is about 150, 160 feet.
Exactly. So this is not a very large distance, basically.
No.
So you have to have really pretty serious mobility concerns to qualify for the mobility part of personal independence payment. Now, for the record, that's only one of the ways that you could qualify for that. If, for example, you're unable to travel on public transit because, for example, you have difficulty remembering where you are going because you suffer from certain learning disabilities, or if you suffer from overwhelming fear and anxiety, and thus your agoraphobia, you can't go out in public. These are the kinds of things that might qualify you as well. So the point of personal independence payment is to provide extra money to allow you to still exist in the world, right?
Yeah.
So if you cannot take a bus because of your disability, you might be able to take a taxi, which is going to cost more, and Uber is more than a bus.
Yeah. So
this is one of the things that PIP is for, basically.
Yeah, and to put that in perspective, if you wanted to take a bus, let's say from South London to Central London, that's going to cost you £1.75.
Yeah.
If you want to take an Uber, depending on the time of day, talk about at best 15 to 20 pounds at best, and at worst 30 pounds. To do that every day means that you've now burned through all your cash for what you need to survive. Yeah. So PIP is literally what it's called. It's a personal independence payment. It allows you to be an independent human being, even though you have something, an affliction that might make it hard for you to do so.
Exactly. And that has some real good impacts on society.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. If you're someone who suffers from mobility issues, or you're someone who suffers from daily living issues, the payments you get from PIP can help you to continue to do things like work and make money and pay taxes, which is good.
Yeah.
Because the alternative would be people being stuck in not being able to work and then finding themselves more reliant on state aid at greater cost to the taxpayer. So there's certainly an argument to be had that a lot of PIP money isn't just sort of going to,
Founders.
Right. Yeah. Well, and not just going to like keep people alive, but also allow them to continue to interact with the society, contribute to society. And so that's one of the big things about it, Chris. So what was Labor going to do about that?
Yeah, Labor is going to start cutting PIP payments.
That seems
and
bad.
Universal credit payments. And according to the original legislation, there was going to be about 250,000 people across the United Kingdom would have their PIP payments gone.
Wow.
Or reduced. I need to clarify if it was gone or reduced. But oddly, either way, if you were needing this payment to get to work, and they said, okay, well, instead of having this amount of money to help you get from point A to point B, you get nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do I get from point A to point B? I don't know. Do I lose my job? Can I work from home? So if you're a person in receipt of PIP and you're like, well, how am I supposed to live? And the government's the answer is tough.
Yeah.
Right? That's part one. And then part two, and just for a note, 3.7 million people in the UK rely on PIP.
Mm-hmm.
And of that, 1.5 million people who were on that plan, PIP, they would have been found ineligible for part of that benefit. So, I mean, and the way they go about finding universal credit, they're talking about you have to basically go get your physical, you have to basically get an assessment on what you can and can't do with your body.
Yeah.
Like, can you walk so far? Like Patrick said, can you walk this far? Can you do this? Can you do that? And they tick you off for points. And if you don't get enough points, you don't get it.
Yeah.
So the Labour Party, in an effort to save money for the country, was doing exactly what the Conservative Party was doing, and they're trying to adjust certain parts of the system to be better for some, but in other ways be harder for others. And the worst part that a lot of people found egregious was that basically if you were able to apply before a certain time, I think it's 2026, November
Right.
2026, then you would be exempt from the changes. And then those who had to deal with PIP afterwards wouldn't be. So you'd have a group of people in the United Kingdom who were able to still access the old system, and all the new people would have to access or not have access to that same system, even though they were the same kind of person.
Yeah, sort of a second tier of eligibility, basically.
Yeah, so this brings us back to the politics part of it. So now you understand a little bit of the background.
Mm-hmm.
As we got towards the vote, the government over the weekend was able to get the leader of the kind of rebels, her name is Dame Meg Hillier, to pull her reasoned amendment, the one that I've spoke about earlier with over 100 members on it. So that was pulled on Monday, and then a new one went up by Rachel Maskell, who was another Labour MP. And so that new reasoned amendment went up, and it only had, I think, 40 or 50 names, people who were, and of course, members of the opposition. My members were on there. Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales, the Green Party, some of them were on there. The independent MPs are also on there. Jeremy Corbyn, now soon to be Jeremy Corbyn of some political party that he's just started with, Zara Sultana, is on there. So there are people on there who definitely who could not be persuaded by the government to pull their names, but they had more than enough to get the bill passed. But here's the twist. The twist is that in order to get the bill passed, they had to start pulling out large sections of the bills that we were talking about that were going to hurt people, hurt PIP payments and all that stuff. So they started taking out huge sections, clauses of the bill that basically made the bill effective. They removed those parts.
Right. Okay. So just to clarify here, right? The reason why they were putting in those parts of the bill to start with was in order to save money for the public purse, theoretically.
That's right.
And so by taking those parts out, the theoretical savings, so those are sort of gone, right?
That's right.
But at the same time, people don't lose their benefits. So I'm gonna count that as a bit of a win there, actually.
It's So far it's a win. Here's the problem. Here's a couple problems. First off, now you've passed a bill that, one, doesn't do what you want it to do, and two, now it's, well, what's the point of passing it? We've only gotten a second reading. The committee stage and remaining stages of the bill are next week, and in that section you can table all sorts of amendments to the bill that you want, and that's going to be a bit wild given how many people were rebelling against it in the first place.
Fair enough, right?
Once you get the bill out of the Commons, which they will likely do, they have a bigger problem because one of my MPs, the chief whip of the group, Kirsty Blackman, sent me a question, and she's like, the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, whose name escapes me right now, she told me in the chamber that that all these welfare changes were in the manifesto, in the labor manifesto. And then Kirsty went through the manifesto and said they are not in the manifesto, which makes this a huge problem for labor. Why is that, Patrick? Come on. You know the answer to this.
That's quite interesting, Chris, because we were just talking about the House of Lords.
We're just talking about the House of Lords.
And I think you're hinting that there may be a connection, and there totally is. So basically, one of the rock-solid conventions that exists in the British system...
It's not a convention, Patrick. It's the law.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
It's the Parliament Act.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So basically, one of the rock solid rules of the House of Lords and the British Westminster system is that the House of Lords has an ability to delay legislation that's made its way through the House of Commons. Now, it can only do that for, I believe, up to 1 year.
1 or 2 years.
Yeah, I think it used to be 2 years, but then they dropped it down to 1 year.
49.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, so they could delay it for 1 year, but they can't delay it if, the government is re-elected and then they put it forward again because the people have spoken, which is nice. It's good. It's a good thing. There is one carve-out to that.
There is one carve-out.
And that carve-out is anything that's in the manifesto. And this is one of the reasons why manifestos actually mean something in the United Kingdom, whereas they have they barely even exist in the United States. Because when a party runs on a manifesto, when it sets out to the people and says, here's what we're going to do if you elect us, and the people say, yes, we want that party to form a government by giving them a majority, at that point, the House of Lords cannot block it. Because that would be, well, to spit in the face of democracy.
Correct.
Yeah. So it's really interesting that apparently someone thought that these were in the manifesto, these welfare changes were in the manifesto, because if they thought that, then they thought the House of Lords couldn't do a damn thing.
That's right.
But it turns out that if it's not in that manifesto, they absolutely can.
Yeah. And like the Commons was, they were having a really hard time getting it through the Commons, where people have to be worried about the party putting money into their next election campaign. The Lords don't get elected. And this is one of those rare times that happens, frankly, far more often than people realize, where the Lords are able to exert some force. One of the reasons that you don't have to carry an ID card around with you in the United Kingdom is because the Lords prevented the Labour Party from doing it in the early 2000s.
That's right. Under the Tony Blair government.
That's right.
Yeah.
So again, like every once in a while, they step in at just the most powerful moments to do these things. Anyway, so the point we're trying to make here is that so the bill passed, but it seems to be a husk of itself. We don't know how they're going to make any changes or fix the bill. And the final part of this is like it's tragedy. By the way, the Work and Pension Secretary's name is Liz Kendall.
Yes.
So we need to remember Liz Kendall's name. So she's in charge of all this stuff, and she, according to rumor that I heard on television, that she wanted she wanted more stuff to protect people's pensions and protect people's welfare benefits and things like that in the bill. And she, according to rumor, was blocked by Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So the job of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, she's the Secretary of the Treasury. She is in charge of the budget. She's in charge of basically figuring out how to make and spend money in the country. It's a very important job. And frankly, it's been a bit of a wobbly few years for this office because we had Kwasi Kwarteng, who ruined it for a number of reasons. Still very upset that I had to live near him for a long time.
I am really sorry about that.
I could see him as he walked by, and I was thinking to myself, you're walking into a business here, and like you ruined their business. Like by default, you ruined their business when you made a speech because he got a PhD in economic history or something. And it was nonsense.
Wait, what? No, seriously, that's news.
We'll come back to that.
Okay, all right. We're going to bracket that, but my God, have I got a few things to say on that.
So here's the deal. So Liz Kendall has these ideas. Rachel Reeves says, no, you can't do any of this stuff because Rachel Reeves wants to lower the debt burden on the country.
Right.
And then kind of all of this stuff is getting undone around her. So they wanted to get to they kept the 2-child cap. They're doing all this welfare stuff. All the stuff they're trying to do to lower the cost of managing the country is not happening. So in PMQs on Wednesday, I was shown an image, like a video of the Chancellor of the Exchequer looking absolutely destroyed. Yeah. I mean, like, well, it doesn't care if you're a man or woman. She looked like she was ruined. Yeah. And then they kept on holding the camera, the video in my face. I'm like, I don't, what I'm looking at, like, there's a tear coming down her face.
Yes, this has been quite big news in this country.
It was bigger than the government's, passing a hollow bill.
Yeah.
It was front page of every newspaper for 2 days. Was a picture of her face, her looking downtrodden, and a singular tear coming down her face. And Kimmy Badenoch, who was a bully, and just a mean person, she was just poking the bear, poking the bone. Yeah. And the question was, why was she crying?
I mean, if I were a betting man, Chris,
okay,
I would probably place my bet on. It seems like the entirety of every plan that she had for what is it she wanted to do in office has basically now just been completely blown up. And also, she is kind of seen as really the main reason why the Labour government's actions have been so deeply unpopular, why so many people are now quite upset, actually, at this government. And so I think for her, she's got to be thinking to herself, am I going to be sacked? How much longer can I keep being here if I have lost the ability to control what it is that we spend money on? And that is literally the job of the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Yeah, I mean, the official reason that was given a few hours later was that the speaker said something mean to her, and therefore that had kind of cracked her. She had said he didn't like something that she had said during a question session, and he had a short, terse word with her, and that had caused her to tear up a little bit. I haven't watched any post-game interviews where she's basically doing the rounds saying, I'm still, fine, I'm going to be okay. But basically, they had to spend all of yesterday recording this on Saturday, the 5th of July, not the 4th. We tried, but we couldn't.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys.
But but during, I think, Thursday and Friday, Keir Starmer and her, they had a hug on camera. She's basically like, I had a bad day, but let's move on. But yeah, like that's not a great sign a year into your premiership when the Chancellor of the Exchequer is crying in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're a man or a woman, either one, because there was always stories about George Osborne, who was sitting in statements on like Monday after what seemed to be a very powerful weekend of partying. And he was just swaying around, just kind of, pulling an Elon Musk. Yeah. So another Chancellor of the Exchequer. But it's never a good sign if that's kind of where you are at this early stage in your government.
It's amazing. It's almost like an entire year has gone by and they've just wasted it. I mean, just fundamentally wasted it. And it seems like the Chancellor is finally being forced to confront the thing that she has been trying to avoid for this entire year, which is she might have to raise taxes, and some of those taxes might have to go on rich people.
Well, I mean, they'll do their very best, I'm sure, to avoid having to tax the rich, because I was watching another video from Sky News, and they were showing, I think it was something like a quarter of all tax revenue in the United Kingdom comes from people making over £217,000. Goes to like 40% for anyone making over £100,000, and it goes to like 50 or 60% for people who are making over like £60,000.
Right.
So £67,000, £70,000. So and they're like, well, the rich can't be taxed anymore, and I'm like, dude, right? This first off, I understand the whole of the UK isn't London, but I'm like, £217,000 is a lot of money.
Yeah.
But we're talking about the people who can buy their own buy their own islands. People who have who have a fleet of blimps because they like the sound.
Yeah.
I mean, there are like we're talking about that tiny sliver at the very, very, very top. That people who they don't just have a private jet; they've got private fucking spaceships. So why on earth are we talking about people making under $1 million at a start?
That's a very good point. And it really is, I think, one of the reasons why, because I think if you were to ask most people, should we try to reduce borrowing so that we can reduce credit costs, so we can spend less money in interest, so that we can reduce, spending. I mean, if you explain the whole thing, the whole theory to them, I think most people are like, okay, yeah, that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
But the problem is, if you're trying to do that, someone's going to have to pay extra. Someone's going to lose out, right?
Someone's going to have to get hurt.
And for the last year, the government's point has apparently been, and the people who must pay for it, the people who must suffer, they are the poorest and most vulnerable in our society.
And the ones who voted for us.
Yeah. And this is smart politics, Chris, because if you, hurt the people who support you, in order to protect people who don't support you.
That's right.
Then step 2 is something, and step 3 is profit. So yeah.
Step 2 is yada yada yada.
Exactly.
And so that's why, and so that's where we are with this bill. I probably cover it at some point in the future to see where it goes.
Yeah.
Because obviously the House of Lords, probably the first time in a while that I will watch the House of Lords for real reasons and not just the Royal Albert Hall bill. Which is hilarious.
I mean, the fact that the House of Lords might literally be able to make this little nightmare of Rachel Reeves continue for an extra year, that is quite the thought. That is quite the thought, basically. But who knows? At this point, the bill, does it even do anything? Is there even anything for the House of Lords to object to particularly?
Well, we don't know yet, obviously. I haven't seen any of the amendments for the bill. Obviously, amendments have been tabled because the bill's going to be on Tuesday. So the amendments would have had to been tabled by Friday, I think, at the latest.
Yeah.
So we don't know is the easy answer. But if the government is going to put down their concessions, they have their reviews now and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So we'll have to wait and see. But we'll let you know. So we're going to take a little break here, and then we'll come back with the other bill of the week.
All right. Take a breather, kids. We'll see you in a few.
See you right back. And we're back.
Welcome back, everybody. It is time for us to turn our attention away from old Blighty to see across the pond.
See across the sea, my guy.
Indeed. To look back to old glory, the United States of America, and see just what it is that they're doing to destroy themselves today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been again like a wild week in America with all sorts of legislative wrangling and jangling.
Oh yes.
To get us to where we are today is that America is now underneath the auspices of the One Big Beautiful Act.
Yes, it was the One Big Beautiful Bill, but now that it has passed both houses of Congress and it's going to the president's desk for a signature, I don't know if he signed it yet.
He must have. Apparently he wanted to sign it on July 4th.
Yeah, that was like the whole thing. You got to pass it by July 4th so nobody has a chance to read it. So I'm going to presume that he signed it, and it is now the One Big Beautiful Act. And this turkey, my goodness, Chris, there's been some polling.
Oh.
And this is one of the least popular bills that Congress has passed. As in, it is less popular than the bank bailouts after 2008.
Less popular.
Considerably less. Like, way less popular than that. It is less popular than Bill Clinton's health reform bill back in 1994.
That's when we all learned how to hate Hillary Clinton.
Exactly. That was the beginning of that whole thing,
that
right?
Was, yeah.
That was also when the Democrats lost control of the Congress for like the first time in 20 years because people were so annoyed at that health reform bill.
Yeah.
So like this is quite a thing. It's 23 points underwater.
Yeah, it's known as potentially the worst piece of legislation ever.
Yeah, it's quite bad. So for our British listeners, you may remember a certain Prime Minister by the name of Liz Truss.
Elizabeth Truss.
Indeed.
Remember her.
Yeah, she of the lettuce head. She who managed to personally spike my mortgage payment by 50%, 30,000 years over the life of that loan. That's 30,000 pounds. That's great. Thanks for that, Liz.
Wow.
Oh yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Well, it's money I could have used.
Yeah. No, it's okay, Patrick. That money was designed to not go to you, but to go to billionaires. She was going to borrow tons of money to give to billionaires, and the economy collapsed as briefly. As a state of that, the Bank of England had to step in to calm the markets because it was getting that bad. Yeah. I mean, who could possibly think that was a good idea?
Well, it's funny you say that, Chris, because it would seem that the person who thinks it is a really good idea to do exactly that was Donald Trump.
What?
Yes.
Wait, no, he's the art of the deal. Yep. He's the smartest human being that ever has been. He is the smartest, funniest, most physically fit man that's ever walked to the moon.
Absolutely, 100%, absolutely the case. But so maybe he will succeed where Liz Truss fell flat upon her face, and maybe I will be forced to eat my words, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
So enough beating around the bush. Let's talk about this thing.
Sure.
Basically, this is a bill that does several horrible things that in combination are even worse. So number one, what does it do? It cuts, I think, $1 trillion from Medicaid. And for those of you playing along at home, there is a difference between Medicaid and Medicare in the United States. Medicare is effectively the NHS for old people.
Yeah.
This is effectively it. If you are over the age of 65 for the most part, then you are covered by Medicare in the United States. And Medicare is well known for having high rates of reimbursement for medical procedures. It pays doctors really well. It is easy to access. It is accepted pretty much everywhere. It is pretty darn good health insurance in the American context. Medicaid, on the other hand, this is basically health insurance for the poor. So for those living in poverty or below, I think, 150% of the poverty line, then you are potentially eligible for Medicaid, and this can be used then to be able to keep you alive. Now, the reimbursement rates are much lower than they are for Medicare. So some hospitals do not accept Medicaid patients if they can help it. However, Medicaid is nonetheless a huge, huge part of the American healthcare industry. Some estimates have up to 20% of all hospital revenue coming directly from Medicaid. So it's pretty big. It's kind of a big deal, Chris.
Yeah. So we're talking about just the gutting of, people's. Again, it's kind of like PIP, and it's kind of like universal credit, but only worse. It's like if the UK government decided that the NHS was no longer really worth it.
Yeah, it is effectively that. So this huge slashing of funding for Medicaid, this is expected to have some pretty drastic impacts. Number one, according to the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan wing of Congress, the CBO states that it expects 7.8 million Americans to lose their health insurance by 2034.
Good Lord.
7.8 million people. And these are people who are on Medicaid, which means these are people who are poor, which means these are people who cannot afford health insurance, which means these are people who cannot afford to go to the doctor when they get sick. And that's going to have some really big impacts, not just in terms of human suffering, although my God, will there be a lot of human suffering, but also in terms of the economic impact on the United States, because people who are sick, generally speaking, have difficulty working.
Yeah.
And
try going when you get a hard flu or COVID.
Yeah.
I know some people do like to try to go into work when they're horribly, horribly ill, but they need to stay the hell at home.
I mean, to be fair, in America, if you have the flu, you go to work as a barista anyway. You pour that coffee even as you're hacking up a lung, and you infect your customers, because if you stay home, you don't get paid, and then you can't pay your rent.
Well, you can't generate revenue for the business either.
Well, exactly. And Lord knows the business isn't going to pay you to stay home and not infect their clientele.
It's outrageous.
Why would they do that? So America is not great on the whole healthcare thing to start with. But if you take away people's health insurance even further, then that's going to mean that people will not go to the doctor for, preventative medicine. It means that if someone is down with a condition that is progressive, but that responds to treatments, if they have health insurance, they can go to the doctor, they can get that treatment, they can arrest the progress of that disease. Maybe they can row it back, maybe they can get cured. And then they're able to work. Whereas if you don't do that, and you take away their health insurance, and then they can't go to the doctor, well, they just get sicker until they can't work anymore. And then you're losing people who otherwise would be working. People who were productive citizens are now not productive citizens. This is what most economists would consider to be an own goal, Chris.
An own goal.
Yeah.
Or another term, kicking yourself in the nuts.
Yeah, right in the nuts.
Because, again, it's just like we were talking about before. If you can get more people working and get more money into their pockets, they spend that money, and poor people spend money a lot more than rich people.
Well, they have to.
Because they have to.
Yeah.
Exactly. They can't, the poor cannot hoard wealth and cut from as little bit as they want. You have to spend what you earn. So theoretically, what you want to do is get a lot of money into the pockets of the lowest percentile of earners.
Oh, yeah.
Because
they're going to spend it.
They have to spend it.
That's going to increase aggregate demand. That's going to lead to economic growth. And that means that businesses have a larger client base so they can sell more stuff, so they can make more money, so that business can grow. And this isn't even like some weird Marxist progressive stuff. This is if you are a frickin' Adam Smith liberal capitalist, basically.
And yet, what does the one big beautiful bill do?
What does this sucker do? Well, it's going to take away a bunch of health insurance, so it's going to make sure that poor people can't go to the doctor, so it's going to make their lives measurably worse. It's also going to have a negative impact on the economy, I would suspect.
But who's going to benefit, Patrick?
Well, it's true. As my grandpappy used to say, it's an ill wind that blows no one any good. And as it happens, this bill does really benefit some people. Would you be surprised, Chris, to learn that it is the super wealthy who benefit?
I personally am shocked. Sharpen, take a breath.
Yeah.
Put on some pearls to clutch them.
That's really good.
I am super surprised that. sorry. Once again, the only thing that Trump will likely be able to get passed in his term before the midterms, let's hope, is another massive tax bill that benefits the super rich.
Well, it's interesting that you point that out, Chris, because here's the funny thing about that. The only real major bill Trump was able to pass during his first administration from 2017 to 2021 was a massive tax cut for the wealthy, the extremely wealthy, like billionaires made out like absolute bandits. The middle class got some trinkets, and the poorest got the tiniest of tax cut. But, at least everyone got something, theoretically, even though the billionaires got way more, even on a proportional basis.
And a lot of those benefits were time limited.
Yes, they were. In fact, they had to be. Yeah. Because the thing is, in order to pass a bill that raises borrowing, right? To get that through the Senate, either you have to have that legislation get past the filibuster. So that means getting over 60 votes in the Senate, which you ain't going to get.
It's difficult.
Nothing gets that these days because the Senate is broken. The alternative way of being able to pass a bill, and the way that the Trump tax bill was passed back in 2017, and the way that this bill was passed this year, was through what's called reconciliation. And one of the rules there is that you cannot lead to extra borrowing over a 10-year time span if you go through reconciliation. So the way that they did this whole thing of borrowing a shit ton of money to shovel it into the hands of the billionaires was to say that those tax cuts end after 10 years, and therefore you can get it through reconciliation. Obviously, this meant borrowing trillions of dollars and just adding it to the national tab like you do. But those tax cuts were going to be coming to an end this year. Or not this year, but I believe in 2027.
Yeah.
Which means that when they pass this bill, what they're doing is extending those tax cuts for another 10 years, basically, which means borrowing trillions of dollars. In fact, we expect this bill to increase borrowing by over $3 trillion.
$3 trillion. trillion with a T.
Yeah. And for those of you who are wondering what a trillion is, imagine $1 million in a suitcase.
Yeah, okay.
Now imagine 1 million of those suitcases.
That's a lot of suitcases.
That's a lot of suitcases.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of suitcases.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how much money we're talking about. Only imagine 3 of those. And that's what America's about to have to borrow from the rest of the world in order to shovel money to the billionaires. But my story gets better, Chris.
Huzzah.
Because unlike the 2017 bill, where everyone got a little something, something, but, you know, most people got basically nothing, but still something. This time around, if you make less than $50,000 a year, not only do you not get any tax cuts from this thing, your taxes go up.
Taxes go up.
In fact, you're expected to lose several $1,000s a year in order to pay for these tax cuts for Elon Musk.
So, what's happened here is that people who are on the lowest tax bracket, the lowest earners,
Yes.
have now been thrown a further tax burden. And Jeff Bezos, just name off the top of my head, guy just rented out the entire islands of Venice for his wedding.
Yeah.
He has a private spaceship and a yacht, and I'm assuming several secret islands. His tax burden will go down.
Oh, yes.
So and where do we feel that these cuts are going to hit the hardest?
Well, it's interesting that you ask that, because there's a few extra problems with cutting Medicaid the way that they're talking about. So I said before that about 20% of hospital revenue in the United States comes from Medicaid. So if you significantly cut that, if you really weaken that, what you're talking about is really hurting the revenue streams of the vast majority of hospitals in the United States. And you might say to yourself, oh, well, those hospitals are all rich, right? They can absorb it. They'll be fine. Well, some of them are. Just not the ones that are in the rural areas.
There it is.
Because here's the thing. We already had a rural hospital crisis in the United States. In fact, over 300 rural hospitals have closed since the introduction of the Affordable Care Act under President Obama. Now, why are we dating it to then? What happened there? Well, when the ACA was passed, part of the deal was that the federal government offered to increase support for Medicaid. To basically say, okay, we're going to expand the pool of people who can access it. We're going to go from people at the poverty line to people at 150% of the poverty line, because they're not making enough to buy their own private health insurance. They're not making enough even to be able to get health insurance on the exchanges. So we're going to give them access to Medicaid. So they're going to at least be able to have health insurance, and the federal government will pay the states to make that happen. But states had to opt into it. So all the Democratic-run states were like, fantastic, free money for our constituents, more health for people. This is awesome. The Republican-controlled states, on the other hand, they weren't such big fans because, well, free money and better health care for their citizens is one thing, but giving the Democrats a win, that's impossible.
No.
You can't have that.
Can't have that.
So lots of states that were run by Republicans refused the free money from Washington. They refused to expand Medicaid for their people. Some red states did eventually decide, oh, screw it, we want the money. We actually don't want our people dying of preventable disease. This is dumb. We'll accept the money.
Bold steps.
I know. But a lot of red states didn't. And here's the thing. Of those 300 rural hospitals that have closed since the introduction of the ACA, 80% of them were from Republican-controlled states that did not accept that money. Now, that's what happened when they didn't get extra money. So imagine what's going to happen when we take money away from them.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hospitals around the country in the United States in rural areas that are barely scraping by. Rural areas are poor. People are more likely to be on Medicaid in rural areas than they are in the inner city. Because, well, rural areas are not hugely economically viable.
Well, okay. So rural areas. I went to university in a rural area.
Ah, yes.
And we got to remember, a lot of that space is used for food.
Oh, yes.
And you don't need as many people to work that land anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of America is just empty space. And people are living in like these tiny little towns, you know, of several hundred or maybe 1,200 people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I went to Western Illinois University, where I'm getting a lot of this kind of off the top of my head from. And I drove around Western and Central Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it's just a lot of nothing. And so it's not
a lot of corn.
A lot of corn. Well, soy, really. And a lot of corn, though.
Mm-hmm.
But the issue isn't that it's not economically viable. It's just that, you know, the economy has changed from an agrarian society,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to a high protein diet society that most people live in big cities. So because the issue that hits these places are, you know, schools. So as fewer and fewer people live in Viola, Illinois, or Paducah, Kentucky, or someplace like that, right? There's just fewer need to have, you know, 1,000 teachers. You might only need 500 teachers because you're only going to have, you're going to need like 50 teachers because you're only going to have 500 students.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're squeezing kids into smaller and smaller spaces because there are just fewer and fewer kids. There's less reason to live in those areas. Therefore, that they just don't make as much money, and they can't support the
infrastructure,
the financially intensive infrastructure of having a hospital. X-ray machines cost money. MRI machines cost money.
Maternity wards cost money.
Exactly. You know, adult care, elder care, infant care, it all costs money. And they cost money at the rate that it costs in a big city. And also there, a Siemens MRI machine, they're not going to charge you less because you're in Keokuk, Iowa, which is actually a big city. But, you know, they're going to charge you the exact same because it's a product.
Yeah. Also, they got to ship it out there, so that's probably going to add a little bit because it's a lot easier to ship stuff to a major metropolitan area than it is to ship stuff to a really rural area.
Someplace in the middle of nowhere. By definition, it's the literal middle of nowhere.
So that's the thing. So basically,
they need the help.
Well, yeah. And in fact, the whole idea of having a central government with a central, fisc, in a sense, is precisely that. The wealthy areas help to subsidize the poorer areas because they're all one country.
Yes.
You know, and if you look at, for example, like which states contribute more to the federal government than they receive back in terms of federal spending, what you'll see is it tends to be mostly the Democratic states, as well as Florida and Texas, which are very strongly Republican. These are the major drivers of the American economy.
And let's not forget that Florida and Texas have two very unique things. One, oil.
Ah, yes.
Two, in Florida, you have two massive theme parks and one of the world's largest corporations that controls massive amounts of the global media empire, Disney.
Yeah.
So Florida doesn't charge income tax.
Yep.
So it's because they have Disney. Anyway, well, back to what you were saying.
Yeah. So basically, if you're one of those states, if you're California, you create wealth. And that wealth is then taxed, and those taxes are then spread around the country. And if you are, for example, Wyoming, you are not really a major producer of wealth. You are getting much more from the federal government than you're paying in because, you know, you're Americans, and we kind of want to have a Wyoming. Who doesn't want to have a Wyoming?
That's the whole point of this kind of, you know, the United States is that the United States is very weirdly individualistic when it comes to each state, but you ceded a portion of your state's sovereignty into the central government, and then the central government is supposed to help you when things happen, like when there are storms, like there are in Texas right now, and flooding. FEMA's supposed to be out there and helping you to find people and make sure people don't drown to death, die, and there's stuff to help them rebuild. Of course, the MAGA administration is trying to get rid of that.
We will be coming back to that in just a little bit, Chris. But yeah, so effectively, what we're talking about with the One Big Beautiful Act is that a huge amount of funding to rural areas is about to dry up, and a very large number of rural hospitals are about to close. And that's going to have some really nasty knock-on effects, because that means that one of the biggest employers in many small towns and rural areas in the United States is about to go poof.
Yeah.
And if you're in this country and you're familiar with what happened when, the mines stopped being economically viable, when heavy industry in Britain became economically unviable.
Right.
The amount of economic dislocation and social, nearly collapse that happened in a lot of northern towns where their industries dried up.
And they just emptied out.
And that's the thing. And nothing took their place. or at least, not enough took their place. And in fact, many of those areas are still suffering today. This is what rural America is looking at happening to them.
Even more so. Because it's been going on for 100 years.
Oh, yeah. But now they're supercharging it.
Yeah. Now there's nothing left. There's no reason to be a doctor in a small town. A doctor who can make maybe $100,000 a year, go to a small town, get a huge house, huge backyard, get, decent schooling and send their kid off to some, good university, either in-state or, far away. There's no benefit to that now because they got to shut down the hospital. But then again, you might be a farmer who voted for Trump. And you're like, I've broken my foot, leg, or whatever. Where do I go?
Well, that's the thing.
And it's the MAGA administration that's taken away the funding for your local hospital.
The statistics on that are pretty brutal. So in those rural areas where they have seen their local hospital close, what we've seen is people have to travel an extra 20 miles to get routine health care, and usually 40 miles, an extra 40 miles to get specialized health care.
It's a long way to drive on a broken leg.
It is. And God forbid you have a heart attack, because every mile that's added on to your trip to the hospital is going to radically decrease your chances of survival.
Yeah, again, and it's not like they can just send out the helicopter. In America, when you have an ambulance, it costs thousands to get an ambulance out to you, and that's in the city.
Yep.
So, they're not going to send out, like a giant helicopter to come get you.
Right.
The Trump administration has effectively told you you're on your own so that we can give Elon Musk tons of money. And this is something that people told you was going to happen.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, it was very much out and about. It was in the open. If you were paying attention, you knew what this bill was going to do. And again, this is why it is the second least popular act that Congress has enacted in like 30 years.
And let's not forget the other two big parts of this. Just before we move on or wrap up, I haven't decided yet. Now they're also increasing defense budget by $150 billion. They're specifically increasing the borders budget by $129 billion. And that's all going to go to ICE. And so if you don't mind, give me a second here.
Oh, yeah. No, this is what we're talking.
So this month, I believe ICE was the Department of Homeland Security was getting ready to run out of its budget. For I think ICE, because they basically were immigration and customs enforcement. They had spent all their money for the year by July, but now they want to give them $129 billion. By the way, the money is coming from nowhere. It's all coming from borrowing. Liz Truss on steroids.
Absolutely.
So, and what are they going to do with this? They're building concentration camps down in Florida.
Oh yeah, no, that's true. They literally have built a concentration camp in the middle of the Everglades in my home state, and they're selling merch about it.
Oh, it's a giant joke. They hope there's 75 million more meals for these alligators.
Yeah,
because it's a meme. Because it's about memes.
Well, that's the thing. Laura Loomer, who is one of the president's supporters, that he hangs out with a lot, actually.
Yeah, he does hang out with a lot.
An extreme white supremacist crazy person.
She is.
She put out a tweet saying that, there's 65 million meals those alligators are going to create. And that's fun, because 65 million is not the number of illegal immigrants. It's the number of Latinos in America.
Whoopsie.
Again, white supremacists. So
Whoopsie. Perhaps
not so shocking that she's gone full Nazi on this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So these are the numbers that they've put into the system. They've taken out, they're taken out billions from Medicaid, billions from green energy. They basically undid Biden's Infrastructure Act.
Oh yeah.
They undid the renewable energy industry in America.
Yeah. All that money that was going to go to red states for wind projects, for solar projects, things that was going to provide jobs and income and wealth.
Maybe a reason to live in Viola, Illinois, for example.
And now that's all gone.
Why would you need that?
Yeah, exactly.
So that's all gone. And apparently they cut $287 billion from food benefit.
Oh, yeah. Well, this is great because you want to know who benefits from food benefits, Chris.
Who's that?
Well, number one, the people who get to eat food, which is pretty great.
Oh, food is good.
But much more importantly, from a Republican political standpoint, farmers. Because they're the ones who grow the food and they're the ones who get paid by that program and by food stamps to provide that food. This is a huge market for American farmers that is about to disappear. $280-something billion is no longer going to go to American farmers.
So this is why people say this is the worst piece of legislation to ever be passed, ever. And, we don't really have a lot of time to talk about it, but probably at our next outing, there was all this rumor that there were things in the bill that allowed Trump to ignore elections and stuff. I assume that's out because no one talks about it anymore.
Well, okay, so there was a thing in the original House passed bill that would have allowed, for example, that would have been said to the court system, you can't spend any money to enforce injunctions against the presidency, which basically would have meant the end of the independent judiciary.
Yeah.
Now, that obviously would be horrifying. And that would literally be, the enabling act. That's when Der Fuhrer is now no longer accountable to the Constitution or to law entirely. The Supreme Court hasn't taken that step. And as it happens, I mentioned reconciliation before in the Senate, because something like that, well, it's not a budget act. It's not something that affects the economy. It can't go through reconciliation. So that got stripped out. Fortunately, not a part of the bill.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah, so there was a lot of crazy awfulness that got stripped out of that bill, but that just left it still the worst bill that has ever been passed in the United States.
Yeah.
It's just not as bad as it could have been. So I guess if we're going to tie it all up together, it's a tale of two countries, Chris.
Yeah.
In the case of the United Kingdom, a hash of a bill is put forward, it's ripped to shreds, and it eventually becomes a bit of a nothing burger.
That's the word, nothing burger, yeah.
Well, I think it's gone from a shit burger to a nothing burger now, I would argue.
Yeah.
And that's really the story of parliamentary democracy in the United Kingdom. How has presidential democracy worked in the United States? Well, started off with the worst bill the country was ever going to pass, and then after some stuff was taken out, it became the worst bill the country's ever passed. So.
And this is interesting because what's happened is the reverse of what should happen.
I know.
So in the UK, the leadership of the party is always right. They always get their way.
Mm-hmm.
That's the theory. That's the idea. If they cannot always get their way, as I said last week, there has to be an election so that you can get somebody else who can run without question, and they can always get their way. And in America, it's supposed to be that the president is supposed to negotiate with Congress and their own people and their own party.
Power is highly divided, and it's really hard.
Highly divided and isolated. So it like in the Senate, for example, 1-2 people can hold up whole swathes of legislation, appointments and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
In the House of Representatives, you got to convince different caucuses within your own group about whether or not they want stuff passed.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it's so hard to get stuff like Obama's original health care bill passed. It's so hard to get legislation on passing, making abortion legal.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it had to be done through the courts, because you couldn't get it through some of your own party, let alone the other party.
Yeah.
And that's why you have like all these, bills that have people work together. And so America, normally you have to work with a lot of people. In the UK, normally you're steamrolled.
Mm-hmm.
And the exact opposite has happened. In the UK, the Labour Party basically stuck it to the leadership and said, if you don't do what we say, we're going to kill this bill and potentially end the government.
Yeah.
And they capitulated. And now it's not chaos, but it's a bit wobbly. And in America, the Stephen Miller, the Trump people, they basically looked at their own people and said, the leader has spoken. You will do what he says.
Yep.
People like Lisa Murkowski was like, I refuse. I'm a senator. I've got a lot of power. They sat around her and they surrounded her on the Senate floor, basically promising her whatever. She got a bunch of concessions for only Alaska.
Exactly.
But basically, but in the House of Representatives, those lemmings ran right over that cliff, happily wearing their MAGA hats into the meat grinder, and they'll do it time and time and time again because they're not legislators. They are followers of a ruler.
Oh, in fact, if I can add on to that, if I can yes and you on the collapse of democracy in America, apparently one of the ways that they were able to get enough Republicans in the House to sign on to the final portion of the bill, even though it's going to rip their constituents to shred, even though it's going to shatter healthcare and the rural areas in their states, was that they were told, don't worry about it. Trump just won't, spend the money on the stuff you don't like, and he'll still give the money to the stuff that you're voting to take money away from. In other words, the promise was he's going to break the law. The promise is he will break the law because the law doesn't matter.
The offer is that he's not going to do what he says he's going to do, and every time somebody believes Trump isn't going to do that, he always does.
Yeah. So, Yeah. So, I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions on how well democracy is thriving in America at the moment. But yeah, I would argue it's not going as great as it could, Chris.
I'd say in both countries, it's probably a good time to make sure, if you haven't started already, save some money.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea, man.
And start thinking about, long-term planning, as everybody should. We're not financial advisors, but obviously...
No, this is not financial advice. But...
the idea of saving money isn't, controversial as financial advice. If more people had done it, we didn't have so many problems. But not everybody can. Yeah. So, in the future, always remember... don't vote for these, shitbags, because they always lie to you. They always make billionaires happier at the expense of yourselves.
Yeah. And if you're unhappy with the choices that are on offer, consider running for office. Consider joining your local party of whichever party it is and saying, hey, there are some problems that need handling. We need to start working together on this. Yeah. Get other people in your neighborhood together on it. No one is as strong as all of us, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a good place to end it. So, as always, I'm Dr. Silverstein.
I'm Dr. Armshaw.
And we are doctors.
But not doctors.
Good night.